And now we have reports of China's influence expanding into the Alberta oil fields. Yes, you heard that right. We now have news of some guards, alleged armed agents in northern Alberta with prohibited weapons. 3 armed guards remained in shadowed areas. When he asked his escort about them, he was told they were with China and not to ask any further questions. Citing his military service, the driver identified the firearms as automatic AK-47 assault rifles with what appeared to be at least 30 round magazines.
There are reports of armed guards at a Chinese-linked oil site in northern Alberta. This news has started to worry a lot of people across Canada, especially those who live and work in the northern parts of the province of Alberta. To understand what is happening, we have to look closely at a story that came from a truck driver. This driver said that he saw something very unusual at a work site that is connected to an energy company from China. This company is owned by the Chinese government, which means the government in Beijing has direct control over it.
They got the same number of diplomats that the United States has in Canada, and yet they do 9 times less, a fraction, about 10% the amount of trade. So why the hell do we need so many Chinese diplomats here if we're not doing nearly, not even half of the amount of trade? In a text message shared by Alberta independence advocate Jeffrey Rath, the driver said he was escorted to the unloading area and allowed to leave his truck only to untie the load. Site personnel directed the loader, which the driver said is not typical at other locations.
The work site is located in a very well-known area for oil production, not too far from a town called Fort McMurray. Fort McMurray is famous because it sits right in the middle of Alberta's oil sands, where huge machines dig up thick, heavy oil mixed with sand and clay. Many trucks go in and out of this area every day, carrying equipment, pipes, and other heavy loads. But on this particular day, one driver noticed something that made him feel very uncomfortable and even scared. A truck driver reported seeing 3 guards carrying what appeared to be AK-47 style rifles with large magazines. According to what this driver shared with others, he was going about his normal work when he arrived at the oil site. He was driving a large truck, the kind used to haul heavy materials for construction or maintenance work. When he pulled up to the entrance, he was told to wait. Then he saw 3 men who looked like security guards. But these were not ordinary security guards carrying small handguns or batons.
Would a friend steal your technology and then undercut your industries and companies and steal your jobs? Do they buy up your medical PPE before a deadly global pandemic? Or do they set up illegal police stations in your country?
Instead, each of these men was holding a rifle that looked exactly like an AK-47. For those who do not know, the AK-47 is a very powerful weapon that was originally designed for military use. It can fire many bullets very quickly, and it is known for being tough and reliable in battle. The driver said the rifles had large magazines attached to them. A magazine is the part of the gun that holds the bullets. A large magazine might hold 30 bullets or even more. The driver was shocked because he has worked in many different industrial sites over the years, and he has never seen anything like this before in Canada. Those rifles are specifically prohibited under Canadian law, and magazine capacity is capped under federal rules. Canada has very strict laws when it comes to guns and weapons. Not every type of gun is allowed to be owned or carried, even by security guards. In fact, the AK-47 style rifle is completely banned in Canada. That means no one is supposed to have one, carry one, or bring one into the country. The only exceptions might be for very specific military or police purposes. But even then, there are tight controls. On top of that, Canadian federal rules say that magazines for semi-automatic rifles cannot hold more than 5 bullets for centerfire rifles or 10 bullets for handguns. A magazine that can hold 30 bullets is far above the legal limit. So, if the driver was correct about what he saw, then the guards were carrying weapons that are not allowed anywhere in Canada, and the magazines on those weapons would also be illegal. This is a very serious matter because it suggests that someone brought these forbidden weapons into the country and placed them at a work site in Alberta.
That's an important one that a lot of Canadians are not aware of. There are Chinese secret, not so secret, I guess, police stations in cities like Toronto, I believe in Montreal as well. And that was reported by Rebel News a couple of years back, but it didn't make the mainstream news because, of course, government paid media is not going to talk against government.
The site in question is tied to a Chinese state-owned energy company operating near Fort McMurray in Alberta's oil sands. The work site that the driver visited is not owned by a small private business. Instead, it is connected to a large energy company that is owned by the government of China. That means the company answers to leaders in Beijing, not to shareholders in Canada. The company is working right in the middle of Alberta's oil sands, which is one of the biggest oil deposits in the world. Many international companies have invested money in the oil sands over the years, but this particular site has a direct link to the Chinese state. Because the company is state-owned, any activities that happen there could be seen as being connected to the Chinese government itself. That makes the situation even more concerning for Canadian authorities, because it raises questions about who brought the armed guards and why. Was this a decision made by the local management, or did instructions come from higher up in China? No one knows for sure yet, but the driver's report has made many people ask these questions. In a text message, the driver said he was escorted to the unloading area and allowed to leave his truck only to untie the load. The driver shared more details in a text message that he sent to someone he trusted. In that message, he explained exactly what happened step by step. When he arrived at the site, he did not have the freedom to move around like he normally would at other places. Instead, he was told that someone would escort him to the unloading area.
We want China to buy products from Alberta. Canola, obviously very important to us, but so are other agricultural products. And so it was good to get...
serve to raise consumer prices, limit choice and innovation, and damage businesses and producers.
An escort is a person who walks or drives with you to make sure you go only where you are allowed. The driver followed the escort, and when they reached the spot where he needed to drop off his load, he was told that he could step out of his truck. But he could only get out for one reason: to untie the load. Untying the load means removing the straps or ropes that keep the cargo secure on the truck bed. Once he finished that task, he had to get back inside his truck immediately. He was not allowed to walk around, talk to other workers, or use any facilities. That kind of strict control is very unusual for a construction or industrial site in Canada. Site personnel directed the loader, which the driver said is not typical at other locations. Normally, when a truck driver arrives at a work site, the driver himself or the people working at the site will operate the equipment that unloads the cargo. For example, if the truck is carrying pipes...
A question for Albertans: is this what we want to turn our oil patch into? A whole bunch of Chinese prison camps in northern Alberta, end quote. Rath added, who the hell in Alberta voted for that?
The driver might help guide a forklift or a crane to pick up the pipes. But at this site, things were different. The driver said that the site personnel were the ones who directed the loader. A loader is a big machine with a bucket on the front, used to scoop up dirt, gravel, or other materials. In this case, the loader was being used to move the cargo from the truck. Usually, the driver would have some control over how his truck is unloaded, but here, he had none. The site personnel told the loader operator what to do, and the driver simply had to wait. He mentioned that this is not typical at other locations where he has worked. Most other sites treat truck drivers with more respect and allow them to be part of the unloading process. But at this Chinese-linked oil site, the driver felt like an outsider who was not trusted. 3 armed guards remained in shadowed areas. While all of this was happening, the driver noticed the 3 armed guards again. They were not standing out in the open where everyone could see them clearly. Instead, they stayed in shadowed areas. That means they positioned themselves where the light did not reach them well, making it harder for others to see exactly what they were doing or carrying. They were watching from a distance, but they were always present. The driver could see their shapes and the outlines of their rifles, but he could not get a good look at their faces or their uniforms. This behavior is very unusual for security guards in Canada. Most security guards want to be seen so that they can discourage trouble. But these guards seem to want to stay hidden, almost like they were watching in secret. That made the driver even more nervous. He wondered what they were hiding from and why they did not want to be easily seen by someone like him who was just doing his job.
People have been warning about China wanting to take over Alberta's energy industry for a very long time now. And they have Mark Carney now, an ally of China, as prime minister. So again, I wouldn't be surprised.
Diplomatic representation. China's diplomatic footprint in Canada, as was released by the Haute Commission, is 176 Chinese diplomats. Now compare that to the US footprint, which consists of a little over, coincidentally, 176 American diplomats. Real examples of what has happened or is happening today in Canada. And you'll be hearing today from our speakers about the Chinese Communist Party's primary tool of interference, the United Front Work Department.
This kind of response is very unusual in Canada, where people are generally free to ask questions and expect polite answers. Being told not to ask questions made the driver feel even more uneasy. He felt like he had stumbled into a place where secrets were being kept, and he was not welcome to know the truth. Citing his military service, the driver identified the firearms as automatic AK-47 assault rifles with what appeared to be at least 30-round magazines. The driver did not just guess what kind of guns he saw, he had a background that gave him special knowledge. He mentioned that he had served in the military, so he had training in identifying different types of weapons. Because of that training, he was able to look at the rifles and recognize them as AK-47s. But he went even further. He said the rifles were automatic, which means they can keep firing bullets as long as the trigger is held down. An automatic weapon is even more dangerous than a semi-automatic one because it can spray many bullets in just a few seconds. He also said the magazines attached to the rifles looked like they could hold at least 30 rounds.
What else are they doing here in Canada? I think it bears reminding folks that there was at least one diplomat who was from the Toronto Chinese Consulate, Zhao Wei, who was declared persona non grata in 2023 and expelled from Canada.
30 bullets in one magazine is a lot of firepower for a single person to carry. Most police officers in Canada do not carry that many bullets in their weapons during regular patrols. So, seeing 3 men with automatic AK-47s and large magazines at an oil site in Alberta is deeply alarming. The driver knew exactly what he was looking at because of his military experience, and he was convinced that these were real assault rifles, not toys or replicas. China has invested over $60 billion into Alberta, representing nearly half of all Chinese investment in Canada. To understand why a Chinese state-owned energy company is operating in Alberta, we have to look at the bigger picture of money and trade. China has put a huge amount of money into the province of Alberta over the years. In fact, the total amount is more than $60 billion. That is an enormous sum. To give you an idea, $60 billion could pay for thousands of schools, hospitals, or roads. But instead, that money has gone into oil projects, pipelines, land, and other energy-related investments. What makes this number even more striking is that it represents nearly half of all the money that China has invested in the whole country of Canada. That means when Chinese companies or the Chinese government decide to invest in Canada, almost half of that money ends up in Alberta. So Alberta is a very important place for China's economic interests in North America. With that much money at stake, it is possible that China wants to protect its investments very carefully. But the use of armed guards with illegal weapons is not the normal way to do that in Canada. China is one of the largest buyers of oil moving through the Trans Mountain Pipeline. The Trans Mountain Pipeline is a major system that carries oil from Alberta all the way to the west coast of British Columbia, where it is loaded onto ships and sent to other countries. China is one of the biggest customers for that oil. Every day, large amounts of crude oil travel through that pipeline and end up in Chinese refineries. That oil helps power Chinese factories, cars, and homes. So, China has a strong interest in making sure that oil production in Alberta continues without interruption. If anything were to stop or slow down that production, China might not get all the oil it wants. This economic relationship gives China a lot of influence over the oil industry in Alberta. And because the Chinese state-owned energy company is directly involved in operating sites, like the one where the driver saw the armed guards, The connection between Chinese money, Chinese oil purchases, and Chinese security practices becomes very clear. All of these pieces fit together. Alberta produces about 6.4 million tons of canola per year, accounting for about a third of Canada's total output. While oil is a huge part of Alberta's economy, it is not the only thing that Alberta produces. The province is also a major farming region. One of the most important crops grown in Alberta is canola. Canola is a type of plant whose seeds are crushed to make cooking oil, animal feed, and other products. Every year, Alberta farmers produce about 6.4 million tons of canola. That is a massive amount. To picture it, imagine 6.4 million large bags of grain, each weighing 1 ton. That much canola helps feed people and animals not just in Canada, but around the world. And because Alberta is such a big producer, it accounts for about 1/3 of all the canola grown in Canada. So, when something happens to Alberta's canola industry, the entire country feels the impact. This is important because trade disputes with China can directly affect how much canola Alberta farmers can sell. China announced an anti-dumping duty on Canadian canola imports. The provisional rate was set at nearly 76%. Recently, China made a major announcement that surprised many Canadian farmers and business owners. China said it would put a special tax on canola coming from Canada. This kind of tax is called an anti-dumping duty. Dumping happens when a country sells a product in another country for a price that is lower than what it costs to make it, or lower than what it sells for at home. China claimed that Canada was dumping canola, so China decided to add a tax to make the canola more expensive for Chinese buyers. The provisional rate, which means the temporary or early rate, was set at nearly 76%. That is a very high tax. To understand what that means, imagine a farmer sells a ton of canola for $500. With a 76% tax, the Chinese buyer would have to pay an extra $380 just in taxes. That makes Canadian canola much less attractive to Chinese buyers. They might choose to buy canola from another country instead, which would hurt Canadian farmers. This is an escalation in a trade dispute that began with Ottawa imposing tariffs on Chinese EV imports. The fight over canola did not come out of nowhere. It is part of a larger trade dispute between Canada and China. It all started when the Canadian government in Ottawa decided to put tariffs on electric vehicles, or EVs, coming from China. Tariffs are taxes on imported goods. Ottawa said it was doing this to protect Canadian car makers and to respond to what it saw as unfair competition from Chinese companies that get a lot of government support. China did not like that decision, so it struck back by targeting another part of Canada's economy, canola. By putting a very high duty on Canadian canola, China is sending a clear message that it will fight back against Canadian trade actions. This back and forth is called an escalation, which means both sides are raising the pressure. And as this trade dispute gets more intense, other areas of the relationship between Canada and China could also be affected, including the oil and gas sector, where Chinese state-owned companies are already operating. China is the world's biggest importer of canola and sources nearly all of its supplies from Canada. To fully understand why the canola dispute is so serious for Canada, we have to look at China's role in the global canola market. China is the largest buyer of canola in the entire world. No other country imports as much canola as China does. And here is the most important part. Almost all of the canola that China imports comes from Canada. That means Canada is China's main supplier for this very important crop. If China decides to stop buying Canadian canola or to make it too expensive with high taxes, Canadian farmers would lose their biggest customer. Finding another buyer for millions of tons of canola would be very difficult and would take a long time. So, China has a lot of power in this relationship. When China imposes a duty of nearly 76%, it is using that power to hurt Canada in response to the tariffs on Chinese EVs. This shows how trade disputes can quickly move from one product to another and how countries can use their position as major buyers to apply pressure. China's diplomatic footprint in Canada is 176 diplomats, equal to the U.S. footprint of approximately 176 American diplomats. Diplomats are official representatives that one country sends to another country to handle relationships, negotiations, and communication. China has a large group of diplomats working in Canada. The total number is 176. That is a significant number of people. What makes it interesting is that the United States, which is Canada's closest neighbor and biggest trading partner, also has about 176 diplomats in Canada. So China has the same number of official representatives in Canada as the United States does. This tells us that China considers its relationship with Canada to be very important. Having 176 diplomats allows China to have a presence in many different Canadian cities, to meet with Canadian officials, and to keep a close eye on Canadian policies that might affect Chinese interests. With that many diplomats, China can also gather information, build relationships, and try to influence decisions in ways that benefit China. A diplomat from the Toronto Chinese consulate was declared persona non grata in 2023 and expelled from Canada. In 2023, something unusual and serious happened between Canada and China. A diplomat who was working at the Chinese consulate in Toronto was declared persona non grata. Those are Latin words that mean an unwelcome person. When a country declares a diplomat persona non grata, it is a strong signal that the diplomat has done something unacceptable. Usually, it means the diplomat was involved in activities that go against the laws or security of the host country. In this case, Canada expelled the Chinese diplomat, which means he was forced to leave the country. This kind of action is rare between countries that have normal diplomatic relations. It creates tension and distrust. After the expulsion, China responded by expelling a Canadian diplomat from China. So, both sides took similar actions. This event showed that in many countries, including Canada, there are organizations that are linked to the United Front. These groups might look like cultural associations, business clubs, alumni groups, or community centers. But their real purpose, according to many experts and government reports, is to promote the interests of the Chinese government and to build support for China's policies. In Canada, there are hundreds of these organizations. They operate in cities large and small, from Vancouver to Toronto to Calgary. They hold events, give out awards, organize trips to China, and encourage people to see China in a positive light. While many of their activities are peaceful and legal, some experts worry that these groups can also be used to pressure or silence people who criticize China. The presence of hundreds of United Front-linked organizations in Canada shows how deeply China's influence network reaches into Canadian society. And when we hear a report about armed guards at a Chinese-linked oil site in northern Alberta, we have to remember that this is not an isolated incident. It is part of a much larger pattern of Chinese government activity in Canada involving money, trade, diplomats, and community organizations.